I'll try to count how many men.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Labadiana, is that correct? So on, okay. I'd like to, before we begin, I'd like to say a couple of thank yous. First of all, I'd like to thank Jadronje very much for her nice introduction, which was translated to me, especially for saying that I look young, which is always a nice thing to hear. Actually, yesterday I looked pretty ancient after my long journey here, but last night I was treated to a plate of cepelline, and it took years from me. I feel like a new woman. So thank you, and that was Arturas and Raza from the British Council who kindly took me out and treated me to that last night. I'd also like to thank the British Council very, very much for inviting me to come here and talk to you today about Shakespeare. This is a fantastic opportunity for me. Vilnius is a place I have always wanted to visit, so really it's a dream come true. So thank you to the British Council, thank you to the Ministry of Science and Education for hosting today's event, and thank you so much to all of you for being here. It's brilliant to see so many of you. So, without much further ado, we'll get cracking with today's talk. Now, I will be talking for perhaps 30 minutes, 40 minutes, just to let you know what the programme is. And then there's going to be a quiz about Shakespeare. Now, somebody told me that Lithuanian audiences were quite shy. Is this correct? Yes. So I thought that if we had a little quiz, that might, you know, break the ice a little bit, and then you might feel bold enough to maybe ask some questions or make some comments about what you've heard in the lecture. Okay, how does that sound? Okay? Good. Right, let's get going. So, today we're going to be thinking about the question, what's Shakespeare got to do with 21st century education? Well, what does he have to do with it? Does a long dead white male playwright have anything of interest to say to today's inclusive global society? Are plays about princes and noblemen relevant to the 21st century learner? Isn't Shakespeare's work too challenging for this generation of digital natives whose skills, after all, lie elsewhere? Won't forcing millennial children to read Shakespeare put them off reading for life? Does Shakespeare teach us anything practical? And how will learning Shakespeare's soliloquies help anyone to get a job in the real world? Well, these questions are all perfectly valid, and they are asked on a regular basis by teachers and students around the world. Just the other day, I came across the following comment from an unhappy teacher on an educational online forum, and this is what she said. Why, oh why, do we make all kids try to understand Shakespeare? It is criminal. Well, if trying to make children understand Shakespeare is a crime, I'm putting my hands up, I'm guilty as charged. I think Shakespeare's got everything to do with contemporary education, and over the course of this talk, I'm going to try to explain why I think so. Now, let's start at the very beginning. We'll travel back in time and we'll think a little bit about Shakespeare's own educational experiences. We know relatively little about Shakespeare's life, and we know even less about his education. We don't really know if Shakespeare enjoyed the time he spent at the King's New School in Stratford-upon-Avon. But we do know that the images of school life described in his plays are not particularly cheerful. Here's a quote from As You Like It, a character called Jack. is describing a schoolboy. The whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail, unwillingly to school. Sounds a bit like my 8-year-old son, actually. But it's not surprising that schoolboys in Shakespeare's time would have crept unwillingly to school. For one thing, the creeping would have started early in the morning. School would have started at 6 o'clock in the morning in summertime, 7 o'clock in winter, and it would have been a really long school day with very little in the way of breaks. Have a look at this teacher in the corner, and you'll see that he's got a rather unpleasant instrument in his hand. In Shakespeare's time, corporal punishment was so widely practiced that one 16th century teacher remarked that God created the human buttocks so that they could be severely beaten without risking permanent injury. It seems likely that Shakespeare's school days would have been punctuated with regular beatings. The milk of human kindness was not much in evidence. What else do we know about Shakespeare's education? Well, we also know that the core curriculum would have been based on the study of Latin, and indeed Shakespeare's knowledge of Latin is apparent in many of the plays, Titus Andronicus, the Comedy of Errors, to name but two. Shakespeare would have been drilled in grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, and astronomy. Rote learning everything by heart would have been the order of the day, and if Shakespeare hadn't been able to demonstrate a satisfactory amount of learning, he probably would have got a few shots of what the teacher is holding in his hand. Of course, much changed in the years that followed, and if Shakespeare had travelled forwards in time to the Victorian times, to the late 19th century, he might have found one development particularly interesting, and that is his own plays being taught in schools. Now, British attitudes to Shakespeare at this stage were quite different, I think, to what they are now. They were influenced by a very strong nationalistic pride. Mr. William Shakespeare, the greatest poet of all time, just happens to be British. He's ours, all ours. And the Victorians believed that an exposure to high culture was morally improving, so reading Shakespeare would make you a better person. And it was the Victorians that introduced the idea of Shakespeare as a text to be read around the class. Now note the emphasis on read. Shakespeare was a text, a work of literature, rather than a performance piece. And this is how generations of school children have experienced Shakespeare, reading Shakespeare around the class. Now, if we just have a little look, here we have some Victorian children. I don't actually know if they're studying Shakespeare or not, but they're sitting in rows in the old style fashion. And then here we have a contemporary class demonstrating a much more hands-on performance to Shakespeare. I think it looks like they're working on Macbeth, but they're all up out of their seats and they're interacting with the story. So talking about the Victorian period, if we move a little bit forward in time to the late 20th century, I can remember how I was first introduced to Shakespeare and his works. I was 15 years old, and when the teacher said we're going to be doing Shakespeare, I was really excited because, you know, I'd heard about Shakespeare. I knew he was the great English poet and playwright. I was enthusiastic. But my enthusiasm quickly evaporated. as we began to work on Shakespeare in the class. We were doing The Merchant of Venice, we were all sitting at our desks, and we were reading the play in a mumbled monotone like this, not really understanding what we read. Our teacher, who was kind of dozing in her chair, would occasionally wake up and simplify what we were reading. It was an inspiring introduction to Shakespeare. I don't think it was an unusual introduction to Shakespeare. Luckily, a lot has changed. In recent years, great strides have been made in the teaching of Shakespeare, thanks to projects and school visits by groups such as the Royal Shakespeare Company. And I think that 21st century teachers are starting to view Shakespeare less as a distant, untouchable cultural icon, and more as a resource to experiment with and to explore and to interpret. Okay, so I mentioned there 21st century teachers, 21st century education. Now, are you all teachers? So no, some of you are, some of you aren't. Just interested in Shakespeare?
Yes, I am. I'm a second-year student of English philology.
Okay, excellent. Good that you're here. But quite a lot of you are teachers, I think. You're all 21st century teachers, right? But what is a 21st century teacher? What is 21st century education? Well, what is it? I don't know, but there are lots of buzzwords. There are words we hear again and again, and I think if we look at these words, we start to get a picture of what 21st century education is. The same words come up time and time again, whether you're reading a report by UNESCO or a post written by a 21st century teacher blogger. Globalization, inclusion, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking. But what place does Shakespeare have here? Let's start by looking at globalization. Our world is getting smaller and smaller all the time. And this is a good thing, yeah? But I'm sure you know it's not without its drawbacks. A UNESCO report on 21st century education puts it this way. People today have a dizzying feeling of being torn between a globalization whose manifestations they can see and sometimes have to endure, and their search for roots, reference points, and a sense of belonging. So this sense of being torn between the need to expand outwards and yet also the need to search for your roots and belongings is a feature of the 21st century. And can Shakespeare help us to address this paradox? Yes, I think he can. Now, we don't know if Shakespeare ever travelled abroad, yet Europe, Asia, and the Middle East are all settings for Shakespeare's plays. Shakespeare's plays are set in 12 countries, with what is now Italy being his favourite backdrop. And some plays, such as The Tempest, take place in entirely fictional worlds. In fact, the only comedy to actually be set in the UK is The Merry Wives of Windsor. The great reach of Shakespeare's imagination is apparent, not just in the locations he chooses, but in the universality of the themes he addresses. And around the world, we can now see national theatre groups reciprocating this embrace by taking the universality of Shakespeare's themes and making them their own. Now, if we look at India as just one example, Shakespeare came to India with colonialism, and during the colonialist period, Shakespeare was performed in English as a kind of language learning exercise, or Shakespeare was translated totally faithfully from the original. In post-colonialism, things have changed. Indians no longer feel they have to stay faithful to what was once the colonial book. They can play around with Shakespeare. They can take the text and they can deconstruct it for their own needs. So Shakespeare is transposed onto indigenous theatrical forms. For example, a Mumbai theatre's production of Twelfth Night incorporated Indian dance and martial art. In the Global Shakespeare Festival, which took place last year, the worldwide reach and relevance of Shakespeare's work was very much in evidence. There was a Beijing theatre company performing that great masterpiece of power and paranoia, Richard III. A theatre company from Pakistan performed The Taming of the Shrew, but they used the play as a way of exploring the challenges faced by Pakistani women in contemporary society. And Macbeth was performed by a Tunisian theatre group in a production which explored the way Arab leaders use, possess, and perpetuate power. Now, I have on my slide here some of these adaptations to show you. Hope you can see them clearly enough. Up at the top left slide there, we have a recent Indian adaptation of Macbeth. You can't see it so clearly maybe with the light, but the director used, instead of using traditional female players to play the witches, these three actors are hijras, which are drag queens in India, and it made the part of the witches very comic and flamboyant. At the bottom there, this is a production of Romeo and Juliet, and this is in Baghdad, and the director took the story of Romeo and Juliet and transposed it onto contemporary times to make it into a conflict between Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims, so it was giving it a real contemporary charge. And on the larger picture here is a Beijing theatre's adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. And what the director did here was used key passages of Shakespeare's original text. And this was songs, this was put to music and it was songs. And other passages, transitional scenes, were in the Beijing dialect. And the whole play became like a dreamscape which incorporated elements of Beijing and Verona. So that's just three examples of global adaptations of Shakespeare's plays. Now, this international engagement with Shakespeare hasn't just been wheeled out for the anniversary celebrations. Shakespeare's work has been touching people around the world for many years. Right here in Lithuania, I'm sure you'll know, people queued through the night for tickets to see Hamlet during the Soviet era. I don't know if any of you did that. You're probably all far too young, actually, to have been queuing up through the night during the Soviet era. But in the Soviet times, Shakespeare was culture with the official seal of approval, and he presented an alternative to plays about Soviet-endorsed heroes. So his plays were a way for theatre directors to symbolically address forbidden issues. So what does all this tell us about Shakespeare? Well, it tells us that Shakespeare doesn't just speak to past generations, but to present and future generations too. As Professor Richard Schoch says, Shakespeare's plays are not static entities that simply float through time unchanged. We're always in a relationship with Shakespeare. And that means the plays change with every generation, every culture, and every era, because we ask questions of Shakespeare. And Schoch goes on to give the example of The Merchant of Venice, which was staged by the Nazis as a way to exemplify prejudices against the Jews. And then, of course, after the Holocaust, there were many years where the play wasn't staged at all because people saw it as a very anti-Semitic play. Now that brings us on to another educational buzzword, this time the buzzword of inclusion. Inclusion is another buzzword in 21st century education. Well, why? Well, the UK-based Centre for Studies on Inclusive Education remarks that inclusion is crucial because the world is changing, because moral values are being re-examined, as stereotypical thinking is increasingly exposed, because national and international guidance advocates inclusion, and quite simply because any alternative seems unacceptable. So what does a white, male, 16th century playwright have to tell us about inclusion? Well, plays such as The Merchant of Venice certainly have a lot to teach us about the dangers of exclusion. And here we have Shylock from The Merchant of Venice. Now, The Merchant of Venice is every bit as relevant today as it was in the 16th century. I'm sure you all know the story of The Merchant of Venice. Just to recap, so The Merchant of Venice is about a 16th century payday loan shark equivalent who lends a sum of money to a businessman, but there's a worrying condition attached. If the businessman can't pay back the money on the date he's promised to do, the loan shark will take his payment, and the payment is a pound of the man's flesh. So the loan shark is a Jewish man called Shylock. And Shylock's Jewishness reflects the prejudices and fears of Shakespearean society. And over the years, much ink has been spilled by literary critics over Shakespeare's portrayal of Shylock the Jew. Is Shylock a comic caricature? Is he an evil monster? Or is he a tragic victim of persecution? And I'm just going to read you a small part from The Merchant of Venice, a small speech of Shylock's, because I think this speech shows really well the ambiguity which is sometimes present in Shakespeare's writing. I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance be? By Christian example. Why? Revenge. The villainy you teach me, I will execute, and it will go hard, but I will better the instruction. Now, I chose to read this short extract because I think there are fewer more disturbing lines in Shakespeare than this promise of Shylock's that he will outdo the evil that has been done to him by the Christians in the play. And what happens in this speech is Shakespeare manages to manipulate our emotions. At the beginning, we do feel a lot of sympathy for Shylock when he's explaining about the fact that him being a Jew doesn't mean that he should have less rights than the Christians. He's entitled to the same rights and the same respect. But as his speech goes on, it becomes threatening, and our feelings towards him start to change quite significantly. So, the beauty of Shakespeare's work, I think one of the real beauties is that we're never quite sure what to think about the characters. There's no black or white, rather it's shades of grey. But there is one thing which is sure: Shylock is the other. He's persecuted and he's set apart from the Christian community. He's taunted for having different beliefs and values, and at the end of the play, he's forcibly required to shed his identity and integrate into the community by converting to Christianity. Now, today in our classrooms and, well, in society in general, we continue to discuss integration, racial persecution, and religious tolerance. So it seems to me that this play, The Merchant of Venice, is becoming more and not less relevant. Now, our concern with inclusivity also addresses equal opportunities for men and women. And statistics about gender inequality are often quoted. So you'll probably be aware that globally only 24% of senior management roles are now filled by women. And the Equalities and Human Rights Commission estimates that it's going to take 70 years at the current rate of progress to see an equal number of male and female directors of FTSE 100 companies. So what can we do to improve this situation? Surely education. Education is one of the most rewarding investments a nation can make. But again, what does Shakespeare have to do with this? Life in 16th century England wasn't always comfortable for women. Now, if we look at these pictures, this one on the right, does anyone know what it is? You can guess if you're not sure. Any ideas? This picture on the right, what do you think it is?
Those are for women?
What?
Those things are for women?
Yes.
Well, it looks like masks.
Yes, okay, so it's a thing for women and it looks like a mask. What do you think this would have been used for?
To keep a woman quiet.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. This was called the scold's bridle. And in 16th century England, it was a common punishment for women who spoke too much. It looks very uncomfortable to wear, don't you think? Okay, women had to wear this, and I don't know if you can see it very clearly in that picture, but there was a kind of bit that fitted into the mouth, so it was very painful and uncomfortable to speak. Women had to wear this, and they were kind of paraded around the street while they were wearing it, so it was very humiliating for them, as well as uncomfortable. I've been speaking so much, I've completely lost my place in the notes. So I'll just keep speaking and hope that I find it again. So for 16th century women then, this was a feature, the scold's bridle, and what can you see in the other picture? Who are these three ladies supposed to be? Yes? I heard somebody say it, witches. Okay. So, if you were poor, if you were a woman, and if you had a pet cat, and if your neighbours didn't like you very much, it was quite likely you might be tried for witchcraft. And you probably know about the witchcraft trials in 16th century England. Basically, it's what you might call a lose-lose situation. Does anyone know what happened in these trials? How they tested if a woman was a witch? Yes, they got burned, but first of all there was a test. Yes? Yes, exactly. They tried to drown them. So they threw the woman into the water. Now, if the woman could swim, it meant she was a witch, and she got taken out and burned at the stake. If she couldn't swim, she drowned. And then she wasn't a witch. But it's better to be safe than sorry, I guess, was their opinion. So it really was a lose-lose situation. So these were uncomfortable times then for women, difficult times in which to be a woman. So what could a writer from this time have to say to the emancipated 21st century woman? Well, centuries later, Shakespeare's female characters continue to invite discussion, interest and analysis. The steel of Lady Macbeth, the wit of Beatrice, the bravery and honesty of Cordelia, the wisdom of Portia, and what have we got? So, I don't know about you, but I think there's a lot to inspire young women and young men in Shakespeare's female characters. Shakespeare's plays don't just offer young people the opportunity to discuss the changing roles of men and women in society. His strong female characters present role models who often kicked against the conventions of their time. Right, okay. Get away from the Disney princesses, I don't like them very much. Okay, moving on to another buzzword. Creativity is a word increasingly associated with education. Why? Why do we need it? Well, today's world seems to confront us with a multitude of problems. Independent advisory body, the Millennium Project, has gathered together 15 of the major challenges facing the world today, and here are 3 of them. How can sustainable development be achieved for all while addressing global climate change? How can population and resources be brought into balance? How can education make humanity more intelligent, knowledgeable, and wise enough to address its global challenges? So, if we want to have any hope of meeting these challenges, we need to nurture creative thinking in our young people. And through engaging with Shakespeare's work, we get an insight into one of the most creative minds that ever was. Shakespeare had a unique kind of creative empathy, what the Romantic poet Keats described as negative capability. And this creative empathy or negative capability enabled Shakespeare to get under the skin and into the minds of a host of different characters, from power-hungry queens like Lady Macbeth, to miserly loan sharks like Shylock, to fairy queens like Titania in A Midsummer Night's Dream. And we need, and our children will also need, this kind of creative empathy if we want to avoid conflict, reach understanding, and find solutions to some of the world's most serious and pressing problems. And Shakespeare's work has been a real and vital force for creative change throughout history. And there's 2 pictures on the slide here, and on the left we have the Chartists. The Chartists were a group of men in the 19th century who fought, well, they did peaceful protests, but they were trying to get the vote for working class men, and they were trying to get working class men represented in Parliament. And one of their leaders, a man called Thomas Cooper, was totally obsessed with Shakespeare. He loved Shakespeare, and he used to lecture the other men in the Chartist groups about Shakespeare. Once he was charged with inciting a riot, and he didn't have any money to pay for his court case, so he put on his own production of Hamlet to raise some money. So the Chartists then were very much influenced by Shakespeare. And there was a very popular newspaper in the north of England, in Yorkshire. And they had a special column in this newspaper. The column was called Chartism from Shakespeare. And in every column there were quotes from Shakespeare, such as this one from the opening scene of Coriolanus. I'll just read it to you, it's very short. Our sufferance is a gain to them. Let us revenge this with our pikes, ere we become rakes. Suffer us to famish, and their storehouses crammed with grain. Repeal daily any wholesome act established against the rich, and provide more piercing statutes daily to chain up and restrain the poor. So, for the Chartists, Shakespeare's plays represented a better and a more democratic world. And they weren't the only people through history who have thought so. Nelson Mandela, it is well known, kept a copy of the complete works of Shakespeare beside him during his long imprisonment at Robben Island. And actually he signed his name beside one of the passages in the play Julius Caesar. So it's my hope that Shakespeare will continue to inspire people to effect changes in the world today, because I think we need this to happen in many areas of life. But we can't bring about change alone. We need to be able to work with other people to make change happen. We need to be able to collaborate. And this collaboration starts in the classroom. Collaborative learning is one of this century's most ubiquitous educational phrases. And it comes, of course, I'm sure you'll all know this, being teachers, or many of you are teachers, it comes from Vygotsky's concept called the zone of proximal development, on the understanding that we're able to achieve more and learn more when we work and collaborate with other people. Shakespeare's principal medium, the drama, of course, is highly collaborative. And when we bring Shakespeare into the classroom, we offer a multitude of opportunities for collaboration, whether this means working in a group to act out a play, or coming together to watch a performance and then discussing it afterwards. Now, the Royal Shakespeare Company has been visiting schools all over the UK. And they've been working with children as young as 5 years old to allow them to experience Shakespeare in a collaborative learning environment. Now you might think, 5-year-olds working with Shakespeare? Really? Well, I must admit, I was a bit sceptical myself when I heard this. But if you go on to the Royal Shakespeare Company website, you can read lots of very in-depth case studies and research articles about what very young children can gain from working with Shakespeare in the classroom. Even very young children can gain important life lessons from studying Shakespeare. Romeo and Juliet, for example, don't inherit your parents' prejudices. Or The Merchant of Venice, be kind and merciful to others. Or even Othello, don't be jealous of other people. So I would really recommend going to the website and having a look at some of these case studies. They're very interesting reading. Of course, it would be impossible to talk about to talk about 21st century education without mentioning the internet. And Shakespeare himself would be very, very surprised to learn about the internet in the first place, and even more so on finding it inundated with extracts from his plays and poetry, along with analysis of his work and countless adaptations of his plays. I wonder what he'd think if he came across the British Council Exploring English Shakespeare course online at the moment, which is people from Lithuania to Myanmar to Australia discussing his plays with great passion and interest. Have any of you been onto this course? You should. It's a great course. It's really, really great. It's Future Learn British Council, Exploring English Shakespeare. I think you might have just missed the last run, but it's on again, I think, later on this year, and it's free. It's free. You've been on it. Hooray! Okay, did you like it?
Yes, it's wonderful.
It's wonderful. Good. Good. Okay, so we've got one person there. If you want to ask this lady in the back any questions about the course when this lecture has finished, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer them. Okay. Finally, I am coming to the end, and then we'll do the quiz, which is probably what you're all waiting for. A note on Shakespeare and the English language. The British Council has forecast that by 2020, 2 billion people will be actively learning English. Can Shakespeare inspire learners of English? What do you think? Of course, yes. Well, as an English teacher of almost 20 years' experience, I really think he can. I've taught Shakespeare to teenage, high school students, I've taught Shakespeare to primary school students, to adult learners, migrant workers who've come to where I live in Shetland to work. And it works. Shakespeare really works in the classroom. In fact, I don't know if what you're doing tomorrow, but there's going to be some seminars on teaching Shakespeare to language learners, where we'll be doing lots of hands-on participative work. If you fancy it, please do come along. In my experience, though, learners are motivated by Shakespeare. They relate to his themes on a personal level. After all, I mean, who hasn't fallen in love with the wrong person like Romeo did, or hurt the person they love most like King Lear? But it's not just about personal relevance, it's also contemporary relevance, like we were talking about in The Merchant of Venice, with issues such as inclusion and religious tolerance. If you open any newspaper today, I think you'd be able to make links with some of the plays in some of the themes in Shakespeare's plays. It's not just about the themes, though. If we're English teachers, we're also concerned with language. And probably we'll all have experience of how much learners enjoy working with idiomatic language. And if you teach a learner idiomatic English, they begin to feel a kind of ownership of the language, and they interact with it in a creative way. Now, Shakespeare was master of the idiom, and many of the expressions we use today come from Shakespeare. I actually threw a few into this lecture. I don't know if any of you noticed. So, through becoming acquainted with extracts from Shakespeare's work, learners around the world can make linguistic links across time and across cultures. So getting to grips with the language of Shakespeare is a really motivating experience for learners of English. I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, when I was talking about Shakespeare's education, that he would have been schooled in rhetoric. Shakespeare would have learned about onomatopoeia, antithesis, ellipsis, paralepsis, and many more rhetorical devices. So rhetoric in the original sense means using language in a persuasive way. And Shakespeare's rhetoric continues to delight audiences and readers today, and it provides much of the energy which comes through the plays. But Shakespeare's rhetoric can offer us practical assistance too. If you look at Lady Macbeth, she manages to get her husband to do exactly what she wants him to do. How many of us would like that skill? Okay, maybe not to persuade her husband to murder someone, but it would be a good skill to have that persuasive ability. I'm just going to read you a few short lines from Lady Macbeth, and then quickly look at some of the rhetorical skills she uses. She says, "Was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself? Hath it slept since? And wakes it now to look so green and pale at what it did so freely? From this time such I account thy love. Art thou afeared to be the same in thine own act and valour as thou art in desire? Wouldst thou have that which thou esteemed the ornament of life, and live a coward in thine own esteem, letting I dare not wait upon I would, like the poor cat of the adage. So here we see Lady Macbeth. She flatters her husband, she reassures him, she questions his manhood, she puts him down, she uses all of these rhetorical skills, and it can be really helpful with learners to look at a passage like this, identify some of the persuasive skills, and then we can see how we can transfer this onto everyday life. So high school learners might want, for example, to be able to persuade their parents if they can borrow the car for the weekend, for example. Adult learners might want to be able to negotiate time off work with their boss. So you can look at some of the rhetorical skills and use them as persuasive techniques in everyday life. And learning about the power of rhetorical devices isn't just useful for using in our own speech, but it can also help us to realize when we are being persuaded to do something. Critical thinking is a big buzzword in today's education. And I think that if we look at Shakespeare's plays, we get a real sense of understanding this rhetoric, and it seems like a very, very good place to start looking at some of these techniques. Finally, many teachers and learners are really put off by the thought of trying to understand 16th century English. And it's true that at first glance, Shakespeare's text looks challenging. However, it's well worth bearing in mind that only 5% of Shakespeare's words are words which aren't used in English today. We know through the work of linguists that Shakespeare's language just really is not that different to the language we use today. And students can make real noticeable gains in their language through the study of Shakespeare. And as a teacher of English, this alone, let alone all of the other reasons I've spoken about today, makes it seem like a really good idea to persevere with teaching Shakespeare in our classrooms. So, as Shakespeare himself said, brevity is the soul of wit, so I'm going to conclude. But my last word is this: Shakespeare's work continues to challenge and inspire people all around the world. And his greatest plays hold up a mirror in which we can see ourselves with all of our failings and all of our strengths. And I think Shakespeare's characters still speak to us today, warning us, entertaining us, and comforting us too. The power of Shakespeare's work links us with our past, and it reaches across cultures while speaking all the while to our innermost selves. Playwright and contemporary of Shakespeare Ben Jonson said, "He was not of an age, he was of all time." And 400 years later, I think that this quote by Ben Jonson has been proven right. Thank you very much for your attention, everybody. Now, I'd like to hear a little bit more from yourselves, and as I said earlier, have made a quiz, a Shakespeare quiz, which I thought you might like to do. So could I ask you to maybe get into groups of 4? So just work with the people you're sitting next to and organise yourselves into groups. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Okay. Oh, we have an exodus. quiz. Honestly, it's quite easy, and there's a great prize. I think they may be rushing home to do a quick Google search and get some inspiration. That's what I think. Okay, now, I don't know why they're all running away, because I think this is quite an easy quiz, actually. I'm sure you'll do very, very well indeed. So it's got 3 parts. There's a picture part, and then there's a first line part, and then there's a multiple choice part. Now, do you want to know about the prize now, so that it might inspire you? Yes. Okay, hands up if you'd like to know about the prize now. Oh, wait, oh, actually, most of you would like it to be a surprise. Okay. Now I'm a little bit nervous. Bear in mind I had a strict baggage allowance, so it's not a very big prize, but it is a good prize. Okay, are you ready? Yes, okay. Okay, so the first is a picture round, so I'd like you to write down number 1 on your piece of paper and write down the name of the play.
What was the question?
The name of the play.
It's the
Yes, but you don't tell anyone. Okay, it's okay, I don't think anyone heard.
Just count the question.
Okay, are you ready? Yes, can I move on? Number two. Thank you, that's better. The name of the play. Shh, don't. You have to whisper, otherwise people will hear your answers. Okay? Number 3, are you ready? Yeah? Yeah. Okay, number 4. Easy peasy. Okay. That's the end of the picture round. Now, the next round, you're going to read a first line from the play, and you have to write down what the play is again, okay? Oh no, sorry, we're still on the picture round. So, whoops, how did that one get away? Is this number 5? Are we on number 5? Number 5. Tricky. Okay. First lines. Okay. Name of the play, please. Okay? Yeah? Okay? Yeah?
You have a question mark here.
When shall we three meet again? That's a clue. Okay, next one. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by the Son of York. Okay. Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our scene. Oh, happy faces, you know that one. Good, good. Okay, this is a longer one, but there is a clue in it. The name might give you a clue. Tush, never tell me, I take it much unkindly that thou, Iago, who hast had my purse as if the strings were thine, shouldst know of this. Okay. And I think this is the last one of this round. Now, fair Hippolyta, our nuptial hour draws on apace. 4 happy days to bring in another moon. Okay? Okay, this is the final round. In Macbeth, which country does Macbeth become king of? England, Scotland, or Ireland? Shh! Keep your eye on the prize. Don't give the answers away. In Titus Andronicus, Titus kills the sons of Tamara. Does he bury them in his garden, bake them in a pie, or hang them over the city walls? The play about 2 sets of twins in the same town is called King Lear, The Comedy of Errors, or The Truth About Twins. How many questions have we got? Yeah, just this is the last question. How many words are used for the first time in Shakespeare's plays? 5,043, 2,035, or 1,209? Okay. Does anybody think they got all of the answers correct? The laughter says it all. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll quickly zip back and we'll mark, and I'd like you to count up how many points you have with your team. Okay, so nip back quickly. Now call out your answers nice and loudly, please. So this one is? Yes, give yourself a point if you got that one correct. This one is? No. Hamlet. Yes, Hamlet. King Lear. Okay, King Lear. Yes. Correct. Yes, Romeo and Juliet. 1 point if you got that. And?
Taming of the Shrew.
Taming of the Shrew. Give yourself a point if you got that one. First lines. This one? Macbeth. Yes. Correct. Richard III. Yes. Yes. Romeo and Juliet again. And? Othello. Yes. Wow, we're getting lots of answers coming from over there. Yes, A Midsummer Night's Dream is that one. Scotland. Yes, bakes them in a pie. I'm getting a feeling about who the winner of this competition might be. Okay. What's this one? Huh? B, A Comedy of Errors. Yes. And this is the last question. It's B. Yes, 2035. Right. Okay, who can tell me, because I can't remember, how many questions were altogether in the quiz? 14. 14. Okay, did anybody get 14? Did anyone get 13? We have a winner with 13 points. Could you stand up? Okay, so now I'll tell you a little bit about the prize. Now, I come from Shetland, and Shetland is famous for a kind of bird which comes to visit every spring. Does anyone know what this bird is? It's black and white, and it has a really big orange beak. No? Let me see if I can find, is this connected to the internet? Okay, I'll see if I can find a picture of it. We'll have a look.
Yeah. It's... No.
No, it's not. Oh dear. Well, it is. I want to show you a picture because, oh, you know. Is this the pictures? Okay. So, every year, no, you haven't won a puffin, I'm sorry. No, you haven't won a puffin. But every year, they come to visit us in Shetland, and they fly around and they make nests, and they also do a lot of poos on the cliffs. So it is someone's job to go and pick up the poos every morning, and your team has won a pack of poo. So please come and pick up your poo. Congratulations. It's not really poo, it's a chocolate. Okay, thank you very much. Now, hopefully you're all, oh, there's pictures of the poo going on there. Okay, hopefully you're all relaxed a little bit now, and now's your chance. If you've got any questions or comments you'd like to make, please feel free to do so. And you could have the microphone if you want to. Anyone?
First of all, thank you very much for your talk. I really appreciate it. I wonder, because in Shakespeare's day, he was appealing to both the commoners, the groundlings, but also the aristocracy. We see a lot of bawdiness in his language. How do you deal with that in the classroom? Granted, we don't use that language necessarily anymore, but some of his imagery is quite provocative. How is that approached in the classroom in your experience?
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, thank you. Well, so the question there, how do we approach this kind of slightly, rude language, maybe sexual imagery, bawdiness in some of the plays, is a very, very good one. I think it depends a lot, of course, on the age group you're working with. A lot of the time now I work with adult learners, and you know your class, so you know what you can realistically do with them. With children and teenagers, however, obviously it would be inappropriate to deal with some of the language and the imagery that's used. And I think something to bear in mind here, and really a key to me when I'm teaching Shakespeare, is selectivity. So I've never gone through an entire Shakespeare play, reading every passage with my learners anyway. I tend to select key passages. Sometimes they can be just as short as a few lines. Probably I would give passages that were very, very juicy. I would give them a bit of I would avoid them. Is the best way to do it. I mean, there can be a lot of sex and violence in Shakespeare's plays, and on the one hand we have to be aware of this, we have to be aware of who we're working with if we're working with children, but on the other hand, if we are working with older teenagers and adults, we can appreciate that this itself lends the lessons a certain amount of interest as well, so it's something we can enjoy. A lot of what we come across in course books nowadays is very, very sanitised. Shakespeare, I think, provides, some really exciting material. So I hope that's answered your question. Thank you very much for it. Any other questions? Or comments? Or if anyone would, yes.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I was a little bit late, but on the way, actually, I was talking to my husband that I'm going to this seminar about Shakespeare, and I remarked that Shakespeare expressed his very deep feeling of love with symbols. My husband totally disagreed with me. He said, well, Shakespeare expressed so many cruel things, so many not nice things, in such a vivid way. So, and then I was thinking, so how can we convey this? I feel there's lots of love in Shakespeare, and there's so many bad things happening, but just around one theme. So how can we put these two things together? How can we unite them and say, well, Shakespeare, the main theme of Shakespeare is this?
The main theme of Shakespeare is love. You agree with that? Okay. I'm not sure if I agree that the main theme of Shakespeare is love. I'm not sure what the main theme of Shakespeare is. I think he had loads of different themes running through his work. So I'm not sure I would present to learners this is the one underlying theme in Shakespeare. I think what I might try to do is, depending on the learners I was working with, I might try to select a theme in a play which I thought would be particularly interesting to them. The theme of identity, for example, because that's a common theme running through Shakespeare's plays, or the theme of revenge, or the theme of love, if I thought they were interested in that. And I think I would try to pull that out and focus on that. But yes, does that answer your question? I'm not sure if it does. Okay. Thank you for your question. Anyone else? Does anyone have any comments they'd like to share on your own experience of teaching Shakespeare? Yeah, or do you have a question?
I have another question.
Okay, sure.
The students now in schools designed in such a way that there's a little literature in there incorporated, and we teach from the course books that are kind of written by British authors. So how come they do not incorporate literature in this? Or if they do, it's so little?
Yeah.
The amount of this, insignificant, really.
Okay.
For literature that is dedicated in the course books.
I think I agree with what you say, and I think it's a great shame. I think there should be a lot more literature in course books. Unfortunately, I'm not a publisher, so I don't make these decisions. I think that what publishers are trying to do at the moment is they're trying to make everything very appealing for you know, the digital natives nowadays. So there's lots of very short texts because they believe that teachers and students don't want to work from long reading texts, and it's all very kind of modern and up to the minute. But the problem with that, in my opinion, is it dates very, very quickly. So something that's very up to the minute this year will be out of date next year. With Shakespeare, on the other hand, I think that his work is timeless, and you know, people, I'm sure, will be studying Shakespeare many, many years into the future. Your question about course books, though, I'm not sure how much freedom you have to look at other resources, but there are so many good resources, teaching resources about Shakespeare online. Have you used any of them?
Yeah, we definitely can use some extra material and poems or literature.
Okay.
But also in the internet, yes, you can find a lot of material extra. But sometimes they just stick to exam kind of format.
Yeah.
And there's no time for literature.
Yeah, yeah.
Still, extra material is also.
Yeah.
Yes, we have extra.
You have extra?
Yes.
Have you been to the British Council teaching English resources on Shakespeare?
Not yet.
You must, because I think you would really like them. They're lessons, they have language focuses, grammar focuses, and they're very, very usable. And you know, your students could benefit a lot linguistically as well as learning about Shakespeare. So I'd recommend them.
I want to share some experience what we did 2 years ago. 2 years ago we had a celebration of the 450th birthday of Shakespeare. And we had a day, my class, my students, we do a lot of reading, home reading. This time I came across The Merchant of Venice. Of course that was an English version, that wasn't great. And we read the students, my students later, we played. And then all classes showed the stage, the play for the students, and on the final day I chose which of the best players, and then we staged that version for them. That was really fun.
That sounds excellent. Good, that sounds like an absolutely excellent project. Yeah.
And this year we are also going to commemorate the date of his birth. No, 1616 we are going to, well, just to mark the occasion of his death.
Super. Okay. That sounds like a really successful project you did. If you yourself enjoyed it and the learners enjoyed it, that's a very good indication of how successful it was.
It was successful, and the acting itself for students who have never acted was really great.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much for sharing that. This year there are lots of opportunities as well for competitions. I think one of the competitions the British Council is organising is a bite-size bard filmmaking competition. So nowadays it's becoming very easy to make film projects in the classroom with learners because, you know, handheld technology is so simple to use. So it's worth finding out about opportunities for competitions and projects like this as well that you can do in the classroom. But thank you very much for sharing your experience. It sounds great. I'd just like to say thank you all very much. It's been lovely to meet you, and thanks so much for taking part in the quiz and for your attention. And I do hope that I might meet some of you tomorrow at the seminars, which will be all about how we can make Shakespeare more accessible for our learners. Thank you very much.